Welcome to Quarantine in Stations. I am Matterall. Today we're going to talk about something that has to do with real life. It's something you're all familiar with. It's been with us for about a year. So we're going to talk with some of our TIS staffers that know a lot about this subject and have personal experience with it. We're also going to talk about what it's been like over the last year. We're talking about COVID. We're talking about the coronavirus that came into existence, I guess, over a year ago, but it's been about a year since we were made aware of it here at Talking in Stations. So with me today is a physician, Tiberius. You know him as Tiberius. How's it going, Tiberius?
Hey, how's it going? Glad to be here.
Great. Can you tell us just a little bit about your background, or if you don't want to, you don't have to, but just so people know where you're coming from.
My name is Dr. Coolman in real life. I am a Army physician out of San Antonio. I work at San Antonio Medical Center, and I am the assistant department head of emergency medicine at the hospital. And I have two residencies. One of them is in emergency medicine, and another one is in internal medicine.
Wow. First of all, I didn't know your name was Coolman. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
All right. Also with us is lovely Lula. How you doing, Lula?
Good, thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, just so people know where you're coming from?
Sure. I'm nurse manager of a large outpatient faculty radiology practice in New York City. Pre-COVID, we were seeing roughly 250 patients a day, so it is quite a busy practice.
Absolutely. So the nice thing about this is these two are Eve players, and they're also part of Talking in Station staff. So it's just amazing to me how professional the players of Eve Online are. So it's good to be in their company. Okay, so about a year ago, we did programs called Quarantine in Stations. It was actually March 13th, March 17th, and I think there was one on the 23rd or something like that. And we were talking about how to take this seriously and how to prepare for it. So we're going to begin today with a movie that we played way back then. This is from Tiberius. And do you want to give us an intro on this thing?
Yeah, so this was a video made by Kirschgestalt. They are a well-known group that breaks down complicated and complex subjects into words and simplistic ideas, so that the average everyday person can understand and kind of wrap their head around it. This was unprecedented of them because when they put this out, this was I think they said that it took them like a week, when normally when they make these videos they work on them for like a month at a very minimum. Sometimes it ends up being months depending upon what their workload is and so on and so forth. So they felt as though they had a duty to the public in order to do this. This particular video I showed to all of my patients who asked me about COVID and were having issues with COVID and trying to understand what it is and how to react to it and so on and so forth. And so I felt this was probably the best informational video that was currently available in order to get the information out, so that not only was it clear and concise, but also didn't induce panic and frustration that a lot of other news organizations were doing to people.
All right, so let's take a look at this video. We showed this a year ago, and I learned some things from it too. So here we go.
In December 2019, the Chinese authorities notified the world that a virus was spreading through their communities. In the following months, it spread to other countries, with cases doubling within days. This virus is the severe acute respiratory syndrome-related coronavirus 2 that causes the disease called COVID-19 and that everyone simply calls coronavirus. What actually happens when it infects a human, and what should we all do? A virus is really just a hull around genetic material and a few proteins, arguably not even a living thing. It can only make more of itself by entering a living cell. Corona may spread via surfaces, but it's still uncertain how long it can survive on them. Its main way of spreading seems to be droplet infection, when people cough, or if you touch someone who's ill and then your face, say rubbing your eyes or nose. The virus starts its journey here and then hitches a ride as a stowaway deeper into the body. Its destinations are the intestines, the spleen, or the lungs, where it can have the most dramatic effect. Even just a few coronaviruses can cause quite a dramatic situation. The lungs are lined with billions of epithelial cells. These are the border cells of your body, lining your organs and mucosa, waiting to be infected. Corona connects to a specific receptor on its victim's membranes to inject its genetic material. The cell, ignorant of what's happening, executes the new instructions, which are pretty simple: copy and reassemble. It fills up with more and more copies of the original virus until it reaches a critical point and receives one final order: self-destruct. The cell sort of melts away, releasing new corona particles, ready to attack more cells. The number of infected cells grows exponentially. After about 10 days, millions of body cells are infected and billions of viruses swarm the lungs. The virus has not caused too much damage yet, but corona is now going to release a real beast on you, your own immune system. The immune system, while there to protect you, can actually be pretty dangerous to yourself and needs tight regulation. And as immune cells pour into the lungs to fight the virus, corona infects some of them and creates confusion. Cells have neither ears nor eyes. They communicate mostly via tiny information proteins called cytokines. Nearly every important immune reaction is controlled by them. Corona causes infected immune cells to overreact and yell bloody murder. In a sense, it puts the immune system into a fighting frenzy and sends way more soldiers than it should, wasting its resources and causing damage. Two kinds of cells in particular wreak havoc. First, neutrophils, which are great at killing stuff, including ourselves. As they arrive in their thousands, they start pumping out enzymes that destroy as many friends as enemies. The other important type of cells that go into a frenzy are killer T cells, which usually order infected cells to commit controlled suicide. Confused as they are, they start ordering healthy cells to kill themselves too. The more and more immune cells arrive, the more damage they do, and the more healthy lung tissue they kill. This might get so bad that it can cause permanent, irreversible damage that leads to lifelong disabilities. In most cases, the immune system slowly regains control. It kills the infected cells, intercepts the viruses trying to infect new ones, and cleans up the battlefield. Recovery begins. The majority of people infected by corona will get through it with relatively mild symptoms. But many cases become severe or even critical. We don't know the percentage because not all cases have been identified, but it's safe to say that there is a lot more than with the flu. In more severe cases, millions of epithelial cells have died, and with them, the lung's protective lining is gone. That means that the alveoli, tiny air sacs via which breathing occurs, can be infected by bacteria that aren't usually a big problem. Patients get pneumonia, respiration becomes hard or even fails, and patients need ventilators to survive. The immune system has fought at full capacity for weeks and made millions of antiviral weapons. And as thousands of bacteria rapidly multiply, it is overwhelmed. They enter the blood and overrun the body. If this happens, death is very likely. The coronavirus is often compared to the flu, but actually, it's much more dangerous. While the exact death rate is hard to pin down during an ongoing pandemic, we know for sure that it's much more contagious and spreads faster than the flu. There are two futures for a pandemic like corona: fast and slow. Which future we will see depends on how we all react to it in the early days of the outbreak. A fast pandemic will be horrible and cost many lives. A slow pandemic will not be remembered by the history books. The worst-case scenario for a fast pandemic begins with a very rapid rate of infection because there are no countermeasures in place to slow it down. Why is this so bad? In a fast pandemic, many people get sick at the same time. If the numbers get too large, healthcare systems become unable to handle it. there aren't enough resources like medical staff or equipment like ventilators left to help everybody. People will die untreated. And as more healthcare workers get sick themselves, the capacity of healthcare systems falls even further. If this becomes the case, then horrible decisions will have to be made about who gets to live and who doesn't. The number of deaths rises significantly in such a scenario. To avoid this, the world, that means all of us, needs to do what it can to turn this into a slow pandemic. A pandemic is slowed down by the right responses, especially in the early phase, so that everyone who gets sick can get treatment and there's no crunch point with overwhelmed hospitals. Since we don't have a vaccine for corona, we have to socially engineer our behavior to act like a social vaccine. This simply means two things: not getting infected and not infecting others. Although it sounds trivial, the very best thing you can. On a larger level, there are quarantines, which can mean different things, from travel restrictions or actual orders to stay at home. Quarantines are not great to experience and certainly not popular, but they buy us, and especially the researchers working on medication and vaccination, crucial time. So if you are put under quarantine, you should understand why and respect it. None of this is fun, but looking at the big picture, it is a really small price to pay. The question of how pandemics end depends on how they start. If they start fast with a steep slope, they end badly. If they start slow with a not-so-steep slope, they end okayish. And in this day and age, it really is in all of our hands, literally and figuratively. A huge thanks to the experts who helped us on short notice with this video, especially Our World in Data.
That's quite a fun.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's quite a fun video, but it breaks down very complex ideas into very simple and easy to understand terms.
Yeah, that was. I remember when I first saw that, I was like, "Oh, that's why soap kills them." So it was kind of interesting. Well, let's get to the very latest information, then we'll go back and look at the year that it's been. Where are we at now with this whole endeavor of avoiding the pandemic or dealing with it?
So in the United States, we've had 537,000 deaths approximately, which is approaching the level. We're approaching a level that it will rival the top 3 deaths by year, so to speak. So I think it's actually heart disease is at about 660,000 deaths per year, which means that this is going to be, I believe, either number 2 or number 3, depending upon what the cancer statistics end up looking like for 2020. So I'm not entirely sure about that. But that's that. I honestly, and I believe we've had just about 30 million total cases, which puts us at about just over 1% of total cases being deaths.
Is it better or worse than we thought it was going to be?
It depends upon how you look at it. So if you had an optimistic outlook, I would say that it probably was a little bit worse. But if you had a bit of a pessimistic outlook, I would say it was a little bit better. There were a lot of people who were concerned that this was going to overtake the entire country and that 1 in 3 people were going to end up being infected with this disease, which ended up not being the case. Even if this disease was underreported by 50%, we're still looking at less than 10% of the entire United States getting infected with this disease. So I would say for all intents and purposes, I believe that this ended up being a much better position than what was initially thought. What do you think, Lula?
I think it's hard to say. I would tend to agree with you on that. And I think as the numbers have kind of shaken out, um, it's a matter of perspective, I guess, too. It felt so much worse here in New York than it did
Right.
for a lot of the rest
Yeah,
of the
you
country.
guys had it pretty bad.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal in last spring.
Mm-hmm.
We'll let this map populate here. Here's something that I keep going back to. When we watched that video and when we were doing the shows a year ago, the big call was to bend the curve or flatten the curve, right?
Yeah, flatten the curve. Yeah. Yep.
Did we flatten the curve?
I would say overall across the United States, yes. I definitely think so. But in certain places like New York, Los Angeles, even maybe Washington, D.C., some of the more major metropolitan areas. I know that we struggled here in Texas in a couple of places. Houston had trouble. El Paso had trouble. But I believe that has a lot to do with the demographics that were in the area. I believe that the poorest areas probably got hit the worst. Because generally speaking, the poorest areas are generally more densely populated, and unfortunately, if you can't practice any kind of social distancing even at home, then you end up putting yourself in a bad position.
Yeah, I think from what I saw in, I think it was not Pittsburgh. It was Pennsylvania example of the 1820, or not the 1918 flu, that they had a big parade and there was a big spread, and they used that as an example of that city. I guess it was Philadelphia had a big parade, and you could see a giant spike, and that overwhelmed the nursing staff, and so they had a lot more casualties than other places that didn't have anything like that. So that's where that flatten the curve example came from for us to follow 100 years later.
Yeah.
So if I look at that,
and we saw modern examples of that as well. There was a Black Lives Matter protest, I believe, in either San Francisco or Los Angeles, and whatever your politics are on that aside, we definitely objectively saw after that an uptick of patients that were coming in who had essentially come down from COVID, and unfortunately, some of them had died because of their exposure to it. And so on and so forth. A lot of these, large gatherings, even when it was outside. I mean, if you look at some of these pictures, you saw some of these people like arm to arm, shoulder to shoulder. They weren't socially distancing at all. And of course,
they're shouting too, which projects
right,
more.
Right. So, and again, whatever your politics are on that aside, this had also happened after the World Health Organization had declared it a global pandemic, and that we needed to practice social distancing, and social distancing orders had been advised by the United States government, but states governments hadn't, decided to enforce those quite yet.
Yeah. So again, what do we know about the disease, Lula? You talked to me about this now that we didn't know before. Like, what have we learned over the last year, and how is it different than it was when it first came out? Because it's kind of a big mystery when it first started.
Yeah, back when we first saw it here in New York last spring, we saw people coming in with just this overwhelming respiratory failure. And what was happening is that these people were going in and they were ending up in the ICU, being placed immediately on ventilators. And what they were finding is that the very high pressures that were required to keep their lungs inflated, to get past all the fluid that was in their lungs, was actually causing as much damage to their lung tissues as the virus was. And they were having these people that were that they just couldn't get off the ventilator, and very high rates of death. And they discovered that if they used a much more gentle means by placing these patients on high flow cannulas and stuff like CPAP, and placed them in a prone position which helps them aerate better, they were having much better success rates.
For those of you who aren't familiar with medical speak, CPAP stands for continuous positive air pressure. It's a treatment protocol that's typically used with patients that have breathing issues at night. So it's usually a very gentle air pressure as opposed to some of the stuff that Lula was describing there.
And what's a prone position look like?
That's when you place someone on their stomach.
Right. And that had, it was a gentler approach, and that ended up working out a little bit better.
Yeah, because it doesn't use really high pressures to keep their lungs inflated.
Yeah. I imagine is,
I mean, it's a bit
Yeah.
more complicated than that. But
I was going to say, yeah, it's not that it's more gentle.
one of the major contributing factors to keeping your lungs inflated is the weight in which is pushed down upon you with gravity. So a lot of times these patients end up being extremely overweight and obese, and they have a lot of weight sitting on top of their stomach. So if you flip that in the reverse, they typically don't have nearly as much weight in the back as they would in the front.
Does that account for why you were better off being, say, thinner than heavier if you had been infected by COVID? Was there any? First of all, is that true?
Not necessarily. I personally don't think so.
Yeah.
A lot of what ended up happening was your being obese. It has negative consequences for your immune system. And when you're immunocompromised with this kind of a disease, like we saw in the video, it can, cause negative effects of, with the disease.
Yeah. All right. Well, for you two that went through this in a different way than the citizens would have gone through this, what was your personal experience dealing with COVID?
sorry, go ahead.
I had the unfortunate side effect of having to deal with this as the rest of everybody else as well, because I actually got infected with this disease very early on. I caught it in April of last year, and my son also caught it in April, and he ended up getting hospitalized for it, and thank God survived. I empathize with a lot of people who have had this disease and have gone through, those feelings and thoughts of, suddenly losing a loved one, because I was right there. As a professional, I can tell you that I have not worked so hard in my professional career, except for when I was in an active war zone, 10 years ago.
Jeez.
So this is, when I have spoken to my court mates, there was one particular guy who I talk to on a regular basis. He says, you have literally just been redlining it since this began, and you haven't let up off the gas. So, and to be honest with you, I feel like I've spent myself that way in quite a bit, to kind of generalize overall how I feel about it. That's a good way of summing it up. And I haven't had a substantial amount of time off except for this week. I asked for time off this week to spend some time with my family, since we're wrapping up phase 1 of the vaccination effort. So I've finally been able to take some time off and cool my head.
Yikes. And Lula, you were in New York City, which is a hot spot.
Yeah.
What's your experience?
Last spring, it honestly felt like you couldn't walk anywhere, especially at the hospital. It just felt like you were constantly you must have been just walking through clouds of virus, because we knew so little of it then and how it was transmitted, and everyone was suspicious of everyone. And even now, if you sneeze or cough, everyone kind of looks at you funny. Um, I also have not had hardly any time off since this all started. Um, but thankfully, I used to be an ICU nurse and have done some emergency room, but I transitioned into management about a year before this all started. And I feel simultaneously horribly guilty that I'm not working at the bedside, but also incredibly grateful that I'm not directly in the face of it, because I don't know if I could have done the things that the bedside providers are doing.
Yeah. But you do like management, and do you see what they go through? What's their situation like?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do still have patient contact. I'm a working manager,
Mm,
but our practice is outpatient. So we have to do things more along the lines of managing social distancing within the practice, which at 200 plus patients a day, as you might imagine, can be challenging.
sure.
Um, we do procedures, invasive procedures in our department as well. And those patients have to be COVID tested before they come in. And so there's managing issues like that. So it's been interesting. It's been a year of evolving practice guidelines and scared staff. A number of my staff have actually had COVID and been out sick. Their family members have died, things of that nature. So
Mm. That's right. You had I don't know if it's okay to say, you can always say no, you won't talk about it, but you had a court mate that drove people in a car for like an hour that had COVID, and you were thinking like, not a good idea.
well, I mean, there was really not much of a choice,
Mm.
you know, but yeah, he was quite ill and thankfully has recovered very nicely.
Oh, good.
Thank goodness.
And your son recovered, Tiberius?
Yeah, he did. Thankfully, he's not exhibiting any kind of long-term symptoms right now. I was quite worried for a long time because he's actually a chronic asthmatic, and we've tried and tried and tried to kind of figure out what's going on with it, but nothing really we could do in terms of that nature. But he was really struggling for a long time. I remember waking up one morning and seeing him pale as if he had like lost 2 pints of blood or something like
Oh,
that. And
jeez.
I got my pulse oximeter out of my bag and took a look at it, and I was like, well, that's a trip to the hospital. And drove 115 miles an hour on an empty highway to get my son to the fucking hospital.
God, the stress level. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to take you back there, but I'm glad that all worked out. Truly, truly.
Yeah, I am as well. It was a scary time for me, but everything has worked out in for the better for now.
Yeah. So where are we now with the vaccine situation, and what do you guys think is going to happen in the next, I don't know, 3 to 6 months?
So I can speak from my state and also kind of speak to some of the statistics coming from the CDC, because I do log into the calls from the state health department up to the CDC. We do have access to sit in on those briefing calls. So right now, the Texas Department of Health and Human Services is reporting that we're at nearly 70% of people over the age of 65 have received at least one dose of the vaccine, which is great because it's statistically shown that if you get at least one dose of the vaccine, your chances of catching the disease and getting life-threatening symptoms is drastically reduced by upwards of 80 to 90%. And then by the time you hit the second dose, you're looking at greater than 98% in terms of the two-step program for the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. And the good thing is about that, in terms of that high of a number, When you achieve about 75% vaccination level, that's typically a level in which everybody who wants a vaccine has received one or is on the list to get one. So that it's basically everybody who wants it has access to it, which is wonderful, and it's important because the 65 and older crowd is where the majority of the deaths are happening. I think it's like 60 to 70% mortality rate when people catch this disease at that age.
At Los Angeles, it's like 72%.
Right,
it's way up there. Yeah.
So it's pretty high up there. So that's for me, it's great because I don't have to sit in the hospital watching somebody's grandfather or parents die, or and just not be able to do anything about it because this disease has really ravaged a lot of people. So that's what's going on here in Texas. I believe that we're up to about, I think, 1 in 5. So about 20% of the people over the age of 18 have received at least one dose of the vaccine, which is also phenomenal. But that also includes people over the age of 65, just for clarification. So the knowing that we're almost at 1 in 4 people in the entire state of Texas has been vaccinated has been a huge relief off of my shoulders. We've healthcare workers in my state and all across the nation have been working around the clock to try to make sure that the rollout of this vaccine, has been safe, effective, and efficient.
Yeah. And are you both vaccinated?
Yeah, I am vaccinated. Yes, I am.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Lula, when did you get vaccinated?
It's been about 4 or 5 weeks now since I received my second shot.
Okay, so I guess it was about a month and a half ago you started, and you finished it about 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, I started at the end of January. I got my first shot.
Yep, I got mine at the beginning of February, and I just got my last dose about 4 weeks ago.
So about the same when medical professionals were getting their immunization. And do you still wear a mask and you still wear all the protective gear?
Yeah. So that's out of respect for the patients. It's also out of, necessity to, be within standard of the medical profession. Masks have generally always been about protecting others from yourself. According to the CDC, doesn't matter what your politics are in this situation, according to the CDC, which is where we get the majority of our guidance from, there is no evidence to show whether or not you can or cannot transmit the virus still while you are vaccinated.
Correct.
So,
we don't know that yet.
Yeah, there's no way to tell that, so we have to remain wearing masks while we're around patients, just so that we, do not, in the very, 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 very small chance that it's possible, we do not spread the disease to the next person.
And believe me, no one's more tired of wearing masks than healthcare workers.
Right. You are the real ones that actually seal up really well, right?
Yes. Yeah, we wear the N95s. Yeah. They're usually tailor-made to faces with the nose, whatchamacallit, a nose bridge as well.
Yeah. I mean, I know that I and probably some of my nurses are going to have permanent marks on our faces.
Really?
Yeah.
Like glasses make dents in your...
right.
Yeah. Well, it seems to be going in the right direction. The vaccines are going up. It seems like the cases are going down. I look at something. Let me see if I can find that. I'll find it in a few minutes. But Los Angeles California in general is down. We had a really bad winter. Post Thanksgiving all the way to February was brutal in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
But New York, you guys got hit really early on. And And then it seemed to recover, or you recovered. And did you have a second spike, Lula?
We did. We spiked again after the holidays, of course, because everyone was going and visiting family. And, honestly, I didn't even realize it until fairly recently that our spike, our infection rates were just as high, if not a little higher, um, as they were back in the spring. It's just that we are managing things much better now than we were back then.
You have your triage effectively set up essentially for
Right.
your management.
Right, exactly. So it doesn't feel as hectic and as dangerous as it did back in the spring.
One of the most important things about the medical profession, especially when dealing with an endemic disease or a pandemic disease, is that there are procedures and policies in place that are effective at treating the patient, but also maintaining safety for the healthcare professionals. And once those go into place, that usually takes a pretty big strain on, it takes a strain off of the shoulders of the people who are, working on the front lines, quote unquote.
Yeah, definitely. I hate to take you to a dark place, but New York City, when this started, you were hit by it first. Can you just tell us what it was like a year ago to be in New York?
It was very eerie, because I would go to work every day and, we would just sit in these meetings and, listen to all the planning and everything. And, my nurses were literally walking around in these hazmat suits with their eyes wide open, just looking terrified the whole time.
So people were
Um,
scared, even professionals were
yeah,
scared.
yeah, everyone was just so scared. Um, and the streets were almost deserted because once they shut down, they really shut down. Um, so you'd go to work and you'd do this all day and then come home in the evening. And at 7 p.m. every night, everyone would lean out their windows and clap. And, it was supposed to be, like, yay, thanks, healthcare workers. But I just remember just kind of being very numb to it. Like, okay, that's great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, okay, whatever.
Whatever.
My daughter thought it was great. She'd be like, "Yeah,
Mom,
let's go watch. Let's go watch."
you're a hero. You're a hero, Mom.
Yeah, and I'm like, I really just want to, do my thing and relax.
Yeah. Uh, Speaking of another hot zone, it was so interesting because when this was first starting out, we were watching it because EVE Online players are curious about the world, so they're looking at things. And one of the things we saw, because we had talked to you, Tiberius, and you were from a place that got hit right away too. So tell us about is it El Paso?
No. I was
San Antonio.
It's in San Antonio.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So San Antonio is a international hub. It's one of the jump points to Mexico. It's also a relay point if you're trying to get to, New York or Washington D.C. and then across the Atlantic to Europe or some such. So we saw quite a bit of the early stuff, just because San Antonio Airport is a massive hub, and there was a lot of people coming in and out of there. I might be
imagining this. Sorry, I might be imagining this, but I thought I remembered that when they had shut down the airplanes, basically, and said no more airplanes coming in from Europe or whatever, they allowed Americans to come back, like citizens, and some of those planes landed in San Antonio, I thought.
Yes, we did get one plane full of, but that was from the. That came from the State Department. It was basically planes of people who were getting round up from essentially across the world, who needed to come back to the United States because there was a grave concern that they were going to get trapped inside of the country that they were in, because those countries as well are like no planes in or out. So they rounded up as many American citizens as they could and ended up putting them in quarantine. And some of those patients ended up testing positive for it. But the important thing to remember is that as we've come to learn more about this disease, it's becoming more and more obvious that this disease actually spread a lot faster and quicker than what was ideally advertised. Of course, there was the scandal with the WHO and China underreporting the disease and infection rates inside of their area, which in turn delayed the responses of people, which meant that we had more people coming in and out of international hubs. When they were tracing a lot of these diseases, they were actually tracing the majority of the primary infections coming from the workers of the airport. So that means that baggage handlers, ticket vendors, all of the support staff that essentially keep the airport running, so to speak, because they may have caught it from somebody catching an international flight to and from wherever it is that they're going. Most of the primary infections didn't actually come from people landing inside of the, landing and staying inside of the airport, I should say.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. But I remember hearing that the planes were landing there, or a plane was landing there. And then a few weeks later, there was an outbreak that was pretty strong in San Antonio. And then you came down with it like a week later. It was crazy fast.
Yeah, I mean, that's just how fast that the disease spread, right? And we also didn't quite understand how the disease worked. We didn't have the proper testing procedures put into place. We didn't really know if this was a disease that caught from coughing, or if it was something that came from blood, or if it was something that came from, expectorant from your lungs. There was a whole lot of things that we didn't know. That we weren't able to put in place in order to try to prevent the outbreak from happening. And right about that time that happened was also about the time that Texas decided to essentially lock down the state. And there was a run on gas, there was a lot on groceries, and a lot of people didn't take it as serious as they thought it was going to, as they thought that they would have. And, we also didn't have a mask culture yet. So there was, to be expected in 2020 hindsight, it was kind of to be expected that we would have such a large outbreak considering the disease factors that were in place then.
Yeah. I mean, when we were looking at it, first of all, we at Talking in Stations and EVE Online players are connected all around the world. And we're usually, again, interested in the world. So we're paying attention. And we had a friend that actually was in Wuhan itself in January and was telling us, like, because he lived there, he was saying, this is a real thing. It's a real thing. And they were going into a lockdown. This is before they were even locked down, because they said, okay, nobody can come into the city. And then, but they still let the trains go. And then they started locking down really quickly. But I was looking at how China was handling it, and they were putting up a hospital in like 7 days, or a big warehouse where they would house people. They were taking temperatures of people off the street, saying, you report over here. They would literally just redirect you. And they took a completely different approach than Europe did or America did.
Yep. But that's how their government works, right? They're a what is essentially a communist dictatorship, and they have the governmental authority to do those things with their citizens.
No red tape; they just do it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. There's no procedures and policies in place, personally, I think some of those red tape issues have gotten in the way of getting this vaccine out faster, and getting things done faster. But those policies are all in place for a reason, and need to be followed, generally speaking. But that's kind of besides the point.
You kept saying this a couple of times, and I thought it was really interesting. I'll just remark on it. We can talk about it or not. But you said, regardless of your politics, you're being very careful. This is a disease.
Yeah, so
why is it so political? Like, this is out of our range of expertise, but I guess we can.
So I've kind of asked myself the same question. I'll try to dance around this as best as I can here, but the best way that I can put it is that unfortunately science has become politicized. Our entire lives have become politicized. That's just the nature of the world that we live in. There are a lot of people who believe a lot of things, and with the blessing of the internet, it also can be disguised as a curse. There's fake or misleading or misinformed information that gets put out all the time that people don't quite understand, or they don't really have a concept or a grasp on. That ends up becoming a political stance, so to speak. My favorite is, I talk with some of my buddies about it, and we make a joke about it, is that there are quite literally people who think that the vaccine is being used to infect somebody with the 5G network. So that's.
I think I heard that one too.
Yeah. So I mean,
I can tell you, my phone doesn't work any better than it did before.
Yeah, so I can tell you, my phone also doesn't work any better than it did before. Yeah. So that's that. Unfortunately, that's just the nature of what it is. It's when I say regardless of politics, it usually generally means that it is an objective truth based in science and factual information and statistical evidence to show that what is being talked about has evidence to back it up.
Lula, you have any thoughts on this?
No, I agree with Tiberius absolutely. Everything in our lives right now is politicized, whether we like it or not, and we just kind of have to get around that as best we can to the actual knowledge at the heart of it.
Yeah, I mean the internet's my doctor, right? Whenever I feel something weird, I'll look it up, and I'm always dying. So the answer is like you're screwed.
Dr. Google.
Yeah, Dr. Google will terrify you. Don't use Dr. Google. Actually use a professional. But it's just so handy, right? You can just look something up and boop. Here the show is just to show you guys a little bit of the stuff that there's a lot of people that showed up today who are confused, saying, "What's this got to do with Eve?" And the answer is I don't know, except that we're all bonded through the game. But we think of Talking in Stations as a place that you talk about things that kind of revolve around EVE Online. Some of it, most of it, is in-game stuff, but some of it is real life stuff. And if we can help people by highlighting their GoFundMe because a relative passed away, or doing charity work, or as CCP does when they do Plex for Good, or if we can actually bring some, in this case, we're all connected to this COVID. It is important to everybody in every place of this planet to know about it, to defend themselves. It just seemed like very natural. And plus we were going into a state of quarantine or isolation to prevent the disease from going further. And here we are producing shows from our living rooms and our dens. And it just seemed like the right thing to do. Actually, I think it was Caleb. For those of you that complain about Caleb this or Caleb that, he's really a brilliant guy that comes up with a lot of great ideas. And we were just talking in our channel and he says, "Oh, you're going to be doing quarantine in stations now." And it was just a joke, but I was like, that's a brilliant idea. Let's do quarantine in stations. And then we had the great fortune of meeting Tiberius. I think it was even out of the blue. Like we didn't have a show, I don't think, or maybe we did. I don't know. And then Lula turned out to be in New York and affiliated with all this stuff. So it was, that's how it kind of came together. And that's just the power of EVE Online. It's much more than a video game. It's a bonding mechanism of very intelligent, very professional people. So pat yourselves on the back for being here and listening to this. Okay. Is there any thoughts that you wanted to cover or talk about today about this or the last year?
I think there's actually something probably important to talk about. I don't know if Lulu's familiar with this or not. There is a lot of research and information that's coming out about what is known as COVID, quote unquote, long haulers. Lulu, are you familiar with that?
Yeah, actually, my hospital had the first long haul clinic in the country.
Yeah. So, for those of you who don't know what a long hauler is, unfortunately, there has been some very lasting side effects for patients who are catching COVID. It's not everyone, but it is a very large and statistically significant portion of patients who are catching this disease. It's about 30%, 30 to 35% of the patients who are catching this disease are having long-term effects. And essentially what they're getting was super weird, because when, doctors, physicians, and epidemiologists, virologists, and stuff like that, they were all looking at this disease, and they were like, man, this looks like an autoimmune disease. This looks like an autoimmune issue. And what's going on here? And we had a lot of patients who were getting diagnosed with hypochondriac syndrome, or hypochondria, essentially, or idiopathic diseases, which basically means that it is all in your head, but you're not going crazy about it. Essentially, that your brain is doing it to you, so to speak. And it kept on going and going and going. And then finally, I think it popped in quite a few people's minds where it's like, okay, so there's something going on here. And there's been a pretty large, significant study that's been done and put out. It turns out that the COVID-19 is infecting parts of people's brains. And I don't want anyone to freak out about that, because, it's not like, oh, people are turning into zombies or anything else like that. What it actually is that there is where COVID-19 actually attaches to parts of your body is called the ACE2 receptor. And the ACE2 receptor is actually in quite a few different places in your body. And one of them is actually your brainstem. And the brainstem is where a lot of your on-purpose stuff happens. Like your breathing, your heart rate, your involuntary movements of your hands and stuff like that. Whether or not you decide to twitch your nose or stuff like that, or take an itch or something of the sort. Those are where those things happen. And it was especially prevalent because there were patients who were dying of depressed breathing, even though that they weren't, that's what I'm looking for here, even though they weren't, having huge amounts of pneumonia. They weren't having huge issues with pneumonia. So it was kind of interesting. But anyway, it's important to note that, even though people are catching this disease and, it's going away, there are issues with people who are having this stuff. And, it is essentially acting like an autoimmune issue. And one of the major problems with this is that when you saw in the video earlier today is the COVID essentially sends your body into what is called a cytokine storm. And they talked about it, I think it was like 3 or 4 minutes into the video. But briefly, it just describes that, your autoimmune system essentially attacks itself, your own cells inside of your body. And what ends up happening in that instance is that, you have your immune system is attacking parts of your brain. And is destroying parts of your neurological cells inside of your brainstem. And those, neurons are not easy to regenerate. It takes a long time. And it takes, especially long time whenever you've got that much damage going on inside of the back of your head going on there.
Yeah. Wow. That is terrifying. My niece is actually a long hauler and pretty severe. She'll have a couple days and then she'll have a third day. She's really exhausted and she has like physiological abnormalities. Her blood pressure's way up, and she is a thin and healthy, like mid 30-year-old. But this is happening to a lot of people.
It can be very debilitating.
Yeah, it's I think the official diagnosis of it is chronic fatigue syndrome of due to COVID-19. And that is essentially what it is in a lot of respects. Is that we're seeing instances in which the COVID-19 is getting past the lung blood barrier and then again to the blood brain barrier as well. So
how, because I've seen people early on, people were saying like, let's tank it. Let's just get it on. I'm younger. I'm healthier. I'm not really worried about it. If it's going to be a severe flu, I've been through a severe flu before. I felt like there was a lot of people that were thinking in those terms because the idea of like, well, what else do you do is shut down the entire way of life. We can't really do that. So let's just tank it. But a lot of the people didn't even have symptoms. They may have some after effects. Like it's not just the people who had it really bad. It's anybody. Is that true, or am I wrong about that? Or you have any idea?
So are you asking, that anybody can, have these issues? Is that what you're?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think it's what it is.
This is not a disease that only affects older people or immunocompromised people. You can have instances in which, in fact, I think I probably even saw this in chat, so maybe I'll use this as an example. You can have people who have a colostomy bag, which is basically where you have your lower colon removed and you have to, not to be gross, but poop in a bag that's attached to your stomach, be overweight, weigh 400 pounds, smokes a pack of cigarettes a day and not really have any issues with it. And then you can have a young female that, this is a real patient case, you can have a young female who's 15 years old, catches COVID, gets a cold, and then is basically linked up to a bed, for however long, whether that ends up being for the next 3 months or the next 3 years, you never know. But, this is a process of the disease that affects everyone. And not everybody knew that, right? When a lot of people are like, well, okay, we'll just get it and get it over with. Well, not everybody knew that this, was reaching into, parts of your, neural system.
Right, because this is attacking the neural part, which is totally different. So
right.
So it may not matter if you had a lot of it. It's just did it get to the area where it could do that?
Did it get to there, and did your immune system react adversely? Is essentially what it kind of boils down to, in a lot of respects.
I think the takeaway is you don't want this thing at all.
Right.
Yeah, not if you can help it.
Yeah. One of the most, I think, was one of the most obvious cases that this was going to be this had a neuropathogenesis, which means that there's, it gets into your neurological system, was when people were losing their taste. You remember people were talking about losing their taste and sense of smell. Well, guess what? There are parts of your brain system that, that do it. The pons of your brain stem affects, your taste and your ability to, in certain times, your ability to smell.
Oh, interesting. That's right. That's why that was such a weird symptom.
A lot of people who were having weird symptoms, if you remember, like nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, weird taste, sometimes weird hearing, weird issues with, staying awake or having chronic headaches or, some kind of odd stuff that was, puzzling, but not necessarily out of the question when it comes to viral diseases.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I know that's the latest. There's also the thing of variants. Can we maybe talk about that and then wrap up? What do you think of the idea of variants? How worried should we be about it? What should we do?
Most effective vaccine to treat somebody. With this particular case, what we're seeing is that it's going through people, and it is essentially mutating itself. Now, mutation sounds like a scary word. It should be treated with a degree of caution, but unfortunately, it's in my personal opinion, I believe it's being blown out of proportion to a large extent, because mutations inside of a disease typically only manifest in the way in which in the way that it's spread. And so how is the viral load going up? Does it infect cells more readily? And, can you infect people more frequently and more often, I guess you could say. According to the Centers for the CDC, all of the variants that have been detected inside of South America, the United Kingdom, parts of Eastern Europe, etc., are all still effectively vaccinated against with the Pfizer, Moderna, and now the Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
Yeah, my niece is a doctor in the Central Valley of California. It's got hit pretty well too, and we were having a conversation with my sister, and this is her daughter, and my sister said, "Well, I've got what are they called? Antibacterial wipes or whatever they are or something." And my niece is like, "That's not the gold standard for disinfecting. It's soap. So I thought that was pretty interesting, as people think like, I'll just skip to the powerful stuff to do this preventative stuff. Oh, the reason I bring that up is because we were just talking in chat here about I guess some things, but we want to make it clear, or we should let you make it clear, what should people take away from this program as it is now?
I mean, I think we're headed in the right direction, especially now that we have increased vaccine availability. Continue to mask up, continue to, wash your hands, take all the proper precautions, and hopefully we're going to start seeing a gradual return to normal, or at least a new normal anyways.
Yeah.
I personally share in the president's optimism that we will probably get back to a degree of normalcy that we're all familiar with, probably by midsummer, would be my guess. I think that is probably a good guesstimate, because we're at a point now where a vast majority of the people who are at risk of dying from this disease have been either received a single dose or both doses, depending upon what kind of vaccine it is that they got. But I share in Lula's advice is that until we get a much more substantial portion of the population vaccinated, we need to treat our neighbors with respect, because we don't know if you don't know if you're asymptomatic and can spread it. You don't know if you don't know if you have it on your hands or on your face and you accidentally touch something or something of the sort. So make sure you wash your hands. You wear your mask to protect others. Your mask is not to protect yourself, but to protect others. That's the most important part. If you're wearing a cloth mask, I tell everybody here what I tell my patients is, if you're wearing a cloth mask, you should be changing it out every day. Those should be going into your hamper after every time you go outside. So if you don't have 7 to 10 cloth masks already, then I would suggest maybe getting some more. But overall, I have a very optimistic outlook for it. I think that things could have been a lot worse than what they are now. And I think we're headed in the right direction.
Good. Yeah. So again, this program was something to celebrate, really, the quarantine in stations that we did a year ago. It's when we all got super acquainted and had a lot of time to sit and broadcast because COVID made a lot of us work remotely and become social remotely. So you can see the whole world's joining what EVE Online is already new. So we had 3 shows about a year ago this time. So this has been quarantine in stations a year later, and we're happy to catch up with Tiberius and Lula, who are both medical professionals, and they're the ones that really kind of gave us a lot of really early information for our fans to kind of to be able to work with, which I think is great. Any last thoughts, Lula, or last topic that you wanted to bring up?
No, I just have to say that I'm really looking forward to the end of this and eventually getting back to a more normal life and hopefully EVE Vegas in October.
Yeah. Is that something you're thinking of going to?
Yeah, if things are looking up, I definitely plan to go. I'm
Okay.
looking forward to seeing my EVE people.
All right. Well, you make me feel better about it because I was so against it when I heard it. I was like, what are you doing?
Yeah. No, I'm in the Discord. I'm ready to go.
Okay. Well, you give me confidence then. All right. Tiberius, any last thoughts?
My parting thought is to everybody here in the audience and everybody who listens later on. We have a general idea of when things should be getting back to normal. One of the most difficult things about the pandemic earlier on was that it seemed like it was never going to end because in a lot of respects it never did, right? Like we're literally a year later, but we're coming up on the tail end of things. My ask and wish for everybody is to stand fast, hold fast, and continue with what we've got going on until things calm down. Like I said, wash your hands, keep your mask on for other people's sakes, and just ride it out, for the next 2 or 3 months. I can promise you that things are going to get better. No matter what the news wants you to say about, the spooky new COVID strains and the new variants popping up all across the world, I can promise you things are going to end up getting better as long as everybody sticks to and maintains vigilance and has discipline in the things that you have been doing and continue to do.
Agreed.
Right. Stick to the plan. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Thank you, Tiberius. Thank you, Lula, for everything you've done. I'm going to give you a little applause. I know it doesn't matter, but I'm glad we have you there helping out like so many others. And thank the audience for sticking around with us. I know this wasn't about EVE Online, but it's important to mark this in our calendar. We've been at it a year, and it's important. You'll remember this. We'll remember this. And these are some of the shows I'm most proud of, actually, of all the stuff that we ever do. To me, I look back and say, this last year, these are the ones that I think about today. So I wanted to make sure to highlight our players that know about this stuff and the good work that they did early on and to continue to do. So thanks, everybody. It's St. Patrick's Day, or was yesterday, or is it today? Does anybody know?
It's today.
Today, right? That's why I put on this shamrock or whatever they call this thing. So we may have a show in 30 minutes to go over some EVE news. So we will see you back here in about 30 minutes. Once again, thanks, Tiberius, and thanks, Lula.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we'll be right back.